Psalm 78, verses 1 through 8. And the Bible reads, "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds and would keep his commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him." You may be seated.
As Glenn mentioned before the shepherd's prayer, we do want to remember that funeral service for Judge Morris will be here tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Those of you who have been a part of this congregation for a long time know and love this family very deeply. Others who have come to the congregation in more recent years may not be aware that Judge is a former minister of this congregation and has remained a beloved and dear friend and brother of this congregation in the years since then. And so it's not just his physical family that's going to miss him dearly. His spiritual family is, not just here, but in the entire Tulsa area. And so please remember Carol and the rest of that family in your prayers. We do want to welcome today Danny and Misty Grayo and their sons Davis and Drake. Davis is age 8, Drake is age 5, and the boys are probably gone to Bible hour. But Grayo family, where are you guys this morning? There they are. All right. And the boys are there. Excellent. It's great to have you guys with us. They moved here from Midland, Texas. They were members of the Fairmont Park congregation there, which some of you may be familiar with. And Danny works in the gas industry, natural gas industry, and they live in Coweta. They've been visiting with us for a while and have let us know this past week that they want this to be their church home. So please seek them out immediately after we're dismissed this morning. A reminder to our life group leaders and co-leaders, we have a meeting this afternoon at 3:45. It's been a while since we've gotten together to debrief and to talk about things that are going well, challenges that we're facing in our life groups, and so please make a special effort to be here at 3:45 for that. And then back again at 5 o'clock for our evening assembly. We have a special treat tonight. Number one, I'm not preaching, and that's a fairly special treat. But Brad Jones, one of our deacons here, who was a part of the recent trip to India, is going to be sharing a message with us. Sadly, Brad and Leah and the children are going to be moving to Houston very soon. His work has transferred him there. And the guys did such a great job the other night in talking about that experience of spending those many days together serving with Brother V and others in India. And we want this opportunity for Brad to speak to us again before they get away from us for a long period of time. So I encourage you to be back to hear that message tonight. And several of you have inquired about Coleman and what's going on with him. He did have an MRI on January the 10th, which indicated a fairly significant sized cyst near his brainstem. And so we have an appointment with a neurosurgeon in the morning that will let us know a little bit more about that and sort of what we're looking at in the coming days and weeks. So we just ask that you join us in praying for the best possible outcome from all of these tests and evaluations. Last week we began a discussion that we're going to conclude this morning. Probably won't take as long today as it did last week. But we reviewed the generations that not only make up society in American culture, but they make up this congregation. We still have some remaining members of the GI generation, the builder generation, the greatest generation, born between 1901 and 1924. Sadly, we are saying goodbye to many within that generation. The youngest of them will be turning 89 years old this year. But we're still blessed to have some of that generation as a part of this congregation. The silent generation is the generation of my parents, born between 1925 and 1942. This was a generation that produced a lot of technical professionals, a lot of social activists, but as I noted last week, no U.S. presidents came from this generation. A lot from the GI generation, and then we skipped on to the baby boomer generation. These were born 1943 to 1960, and again, you can find different dates of delineation between these generations. I've seen the boomer generation taken all the way to 1964 as a date of birth. But this has also been called the me generation, and it was a mighty generation numerically. 75 million baby boomers were born between 1943 and 1960. And then after them, which according to this, I would be a part of the baby buster generation, Generation X, the boomerang generation. And this was a very pragmatic and continues to be a rather pragmatic and skeptical generation, rather reactive if you're just looking for one word to describe the generation. After them, the millennials, 1981 to 2000, this was the first generation to reach adulthood in the new millennium. A very socially conscious generation, civic, you might say, much like the GI generation, the generation of some of their grandparents or great-grandparents. And then Generation Next, the one that began being born in the year 2000 on up to the present. This is the first generation that was born entirely in the digital age. And so culture, how they interact with other people, how they communicate with other people, has been radically different, certainly from the way their grandparents and great-grandparents communicated with others. And just based on our very unscientific visual poll last week, when I asked representatives of each of these generations to stand, other than the greatly diminished greatest generation, the rest of these generations are widely represented within this body of believers, and that was somewhat surprising to me and rather encouraging to me, that there is such a broad generational mix that makes up this congregation. But notice in that right-hand column, words like civic or adaptive or idealist or reactive or socially conscious or with Generation Next still too early to tell. These are broad generalizations. This is a very, very broad brush. These are stereotypes that you could call, as you could call them, that have been applied to these various generations. Not nearly everyone in these generations would bear the same types of characteristics of personality and attitude and behavior. Just for example, in regard to the music of the church, the songs that we sing, I have some brothers in Christ who are significantly older than me who never met a contemporary praise song that they didn't like. They're just all about new songs, new music, new expressions of praise. And I also have some brothers in Christ who are significantly younger than me who would be extremely happy if we never sang anything written after 1850. It has nothing to do with their generation. It has to do with their personal preferences. It has to do with their own faith, their own background, their own upbringing. And so we need to be careful about stereotyping individuals just based on the year of their birth. We don't need to define people by that. We need to realize that each and every individual is a unique creation of God. And in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, we're reminded that all of us have been created in the image of God. Psalm 139, verse 14, each and every one of us has been fearfully and wonderfully made. And God has given us some uniquenesses, some idiosyncrasies that are just special to us, that aren't necessarily based on whether I was born between 1901 and 1924, or whether I was born between 1981 and 2000. I am a unique creation of God, and so are you. And so we don't need to be patronizing. We don't need to be impersonal by hurting people in large numbers into these generational categories. One size does not fit all. And that maxim holds true in regard to generations as well. Yes, there are some real and significant differences that exist between the generations, but thankfully God has placed us in a context. He has brought us into a divinely designed church that was intended to overcome differences that exist between people. And so there's no better place for people from diverse backgrounds and diverse ways of thinking and diverse patterns of socialization. There's no better place for those people to come together as one than in the body of Jesus Christ. If you do want to turn to Ephesians chapter 2, we are going to read verses 11 through 22 together. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 through 22. Therefore, remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Jesus Christ, you who formerly were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For He Himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. Jesus is the destroyer of dividing walls. Whether they're nationalistic, whether they're racial, whether they're gender-oriented, Jesus is the one who breaks down barrier walls and dividing walls. By abolishing in His flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in Himself He might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both into one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. And He came and preached peace to those who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through Him we both have our access in one Spirit to the Father. So then you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you're fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus Himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, is growing into a holy temple of the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit. If Jesus could break down the dividing wall that had stood for centuries between Jews and Gentiles, Jesus can similarly break down those barrier walls that exist between various generations in American culture. And then also sharing with you Colossians chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. You've put on the new self, which is being renewed to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him, a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free man, but Christ is all and in all. You can add different age groups to that list as well. You can add young and old and everyone in between. Sometime last year, I can't remember exactly when, Kim introduced me to Odwalla beverages. And these are wonderfully delicious and nutritious fruit smoothies and juice drinks. You can read right on the back the quantities of various fruits that have gone into this. But it's all natural. There aren't preservatives or emulsifiers. And so there's this wonderful message at the bottom of the back of the label, which says, separation is natural, shake it up. All right? So before you want to drink this thing, depending on how long it's been since it came from the factory, depending on how long it's been sitting at the cooler at the grocery store or the Quick Trip, you want to shake that thing vigorously to mix things back up, because in that state, separation is natural. Well, apparently separation is natural when it comes to generations in our culture. Maybe it's more unnatural than we would like to think, and we are forced into these separate compartments and segments, being segregated and isolated from one another. And so, since that tends to be the gravitational pull within our culture, and sometimes the church finds itself following societal trends rather than leading societal trends, we have to be willing to shake things up sometimes. Dennis Sawyer provides what I think is a very compelling rationale for those who would question even the need for greater intergenerational relationships within the body of Christ. Why talk so much about intergenerational ministry? Sawyer says, because common sense isn't so common anymore. The wisdom that used to be shared around the supper table in America from older to younger isn't happening. Those contexts that used to happen with greater frequency, that put Lois and Eunice and Timothy in the same context where they could not only talk about life, they could talk about faith, and they could talk about God, and they could talk about morality, and they could talk about holiness. It seems that society is pulling generations further and further apart. I mentioned last week that in 1950, 1 out of every 2 households in America had a live-in grandparent. Half of American households were 3-generation families. And now that's just the case with about 2% of families. And those wonderful times of conversation around the family dinner table just don't happen like they used to at one time. And it's within contexts like that. It doesn't have to be around the dinner table. It can be in a car. It can be fishing. It can be doing anything. But within those contexts where you have older and younger people together, it's where a lot of wisdom can be imparted. And that's not unidirectional. I'm just not talking about the older imparting wisdom to the younger. I'm talking about the younger sometimes imparting wisdom to those who are older. If you want to look at Job 32 with me for just a moment. Job chapter 32, right before the book of Psalms in your Old Testament. Job chapter 32, beginning in verse 4. And I'll give you a second to turn there, either electronically or in your hardbound Bible. But by the time we get to chapter 32, Job and his friends have been at it for quite some time. They've gone through 3 series of discourses, making accusations, answering accusations, and basically these 3 friends of Job have painted him to a corner where they feel like he just needs to admit what he's done wrong, to bring all this pain and suffering upon himself and upon his family, and this destruction upon his family. Job has gone a little too far in defending himself and painting himself as almost a perfect person, an inherently righteous person. And I don't know exactly how old Job and his friends are, but there's a younger guy, Elihu, who's been sitting there taking this in for a while, and he has held his tongue as long as he can. And so he busts it out. He breaks loose, beginning in verse 4 of Job 32. Now Elihu, we're introduced to him back up in verse 2 as the son of Barachel the Buzite. Verse 4, now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were years older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of the 3 men, his anger burned. So Elihu the son of Barachel the Buzite spoke out and said, I'm young in years and you are old. Therefore I was shy and afraid to tell you what I think. I thought age should speak, and increased years should teach wisdom. But it is the Spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives them understanding. The abundant in years may not be wise, nor may elders understand justice. So I say, listen to me, I'll tell you what I think. And then he goes on with this beautiful response to both Job and his friends. Sometimes those much younger than ourselves have a lot to teach us, and there is wisdom to be gained from them. That's why I'm grateful to see, pleased to see, not a segregated youth ministry within this congregation, but an integrated youth ministry. Sure, there are times when just you guys need to be together to talk about things that you guys get more than the rest of us get. And I'm glad that we can provide those settings and those opportunities for you. But I'm grateful that this youth group also has opportunities to be integrated into the life of the congregation as a whole, because if that doesn't happen, then youth are left unprepared and ill-equipped for assimilation into the life of the whole body of Christ once they leave school, especially if a youth program has been more activity-driven than it is spiritually focused. And that brings us to this quotation from David Ing. He says, often the long-term effect, that is for isolated, segregated, segmented youth groups, Often the long-term effect is that young people find no reserves of faith to draw upon once the party is over, once the young people have graduated from high school and go away to college or work. They have been the recipients of exciting programming without dealing with Christ's claim on their lives or having to assume any responsibility for the life of the group. They have no ownership in the group or in the Christian faith. By participating in the life and mission of the church, rather than being mere recipients, the young people come to know who they are and what the church is. They have an understanding that this is their church from the get-go. That when they put on Jesus Christ in baptism, they are made a part of the family. Not a part of a segment of the family, but a part of the entirety of the family. It was encouraging to get feedback from the life groups. I'll be sharing some of this with you probably in the not too distant future. But I've heard from 11 of the life groups thus far in regard to what I ask you, one of the things that I ask you to discuss on Sunday evening or Sunday afternoon. Identify some things that we are already doing of a highly valuable intergenerational nature here at the Broken Arrow Church. And also identify ways in which that could be increased, that could be improved, and that could be enhanced. And I got some wonderful feedback. Some of you guys were Johnny on the spot and got back with me by email on Sunday, so thank you for that. This is going to be very valuable to our ongoing conversation in this matter. But just like eschatology or end times things, there is part of eschatology that is now, that has been realized, that has been inaugurated. There are aspects of the kingdom that have come. And we enjoy salvation, we enjoy redemption, the Spirit dwells within us, we are being transformed into the image of Christ, but it's not yet consummated. There is still some not yet to eschatology. The return of Jesus Christ, the resurrection from the dead, being perfected, being entirely made into the image of Jesus Christ. And so we're familiar with these terms, the already and the not yet, when it comes to eschatology, when it comes to teaching about the kingdom of God. And I see the same thing in regard to intergenerational ministry at the Broken Arrow Church. We have the already and we have the not yet. And a part of bringing the not yet to greater reality is just what happened last Wednesday night. And again, you guys are to be commended so much for the way you took the bull by the horns, you took initiative, you developed a plan, you enlisted the assistance of other generations in helping you execute the plan. And that was a beautiful demonstration of intergenerational involvement. Are there differences between those generations? Yeah, just talk to them for a little while. You'll pick up on some of those. But what was stronger, what was greater, what was more important was the things that they shared in common. A common faith, a common commitment, a common love for the Dixon family, a common desire to achieve a goal that would benefit that family, and they worked together extremely well. And it's things like that that reminds us that despite the generational differences that exist among us, there is more that unites us than divides us. And as I shared last week, that Alabama concert in 2003 and the Rush concert in 2008, where Hannah and I both saw 3-generation families there together enjoying the music, indicated that despite the differences between those grandparents, parents, and children, they had a common passion. They were bought into, they were locked into a common passion. I believe that one of the key words to bringing all this about is intentionality. This is something that just doesn't happen through the natural course of things, at least not very often. It has to be deliberate. It has to be on purpose and for a purpose. And so we're going to be talking about more intentionality when it comes to getting our generations together. I read this for you last week, but I want you to see it as well as having me reread it again because I think it's central to this concept of intentional intergenerational ministry. Robert Roston in the Journal of Religious Gerontology writes that the fundamental premise is that an intergenerational approach to congregational life is a conscious, intentional choice on the part of the leadership and membership of that congregation to honor both the contributions and the requirements of each and every generation for the good of that generation as well as the good of the whole community. Go the other direction here. There we go. Most congregations, by their very nature, are intergenerational. That's true of this congregation. But not all congregations utilize this resource as the very foundation of their identity, mission, and ministry. Congregations are products not only of the Word, but of our culture with its biases, prejudices, and labels. Thus, some congregations may favor one generation over another, ignore the needs and potential of a given generation, segregate them from one another, patronize one or the other, or even have them in competition with one another. Any and all of these situations do not contribute to the health, healing, and wholeness of any of the generations. And such a commitment calls for creativity and courage. And we want to be creative. We want to be courageous in doing this. You'll see different terms used as we periodically address this subject, whether intergenerational or transgenerational or cross-generational or multi-generational or age integrated. And I do have to apologize, at least to an extent, because to me these terms are somewhat redundant when applied to the body of Christ and when applied to Christian ministry. Just like I think the terms lifestyle evangelism and conversational evangelism or friendship evangelism are somewhat redundant, simply because I think that's the way God intended evangelism to be. To use our lifestyle, to use our friendships, to use our conversations. So it's somewhat redundant. I think intergenerational ministry in the body of Christ is somewhat redundant because I do believe that that is precisely how God did intend it to be. As Bolender said, as I mentioned last week, the biblical worldview is transgenerational. One more quote here from James Emery White in talking about how the things that divide us are outweighed by the things that we share in common, and how sometimes these things change as we move through one phase of life to another. Particularly, White was writing a few years ago to describe how busters, Gen Xers, were sort of changing into boomers. He said, "We have found that once 20-somethings get married and have a child, they begin to think and look and act very much like boomers. When they start a family, those who wanted," and he's talking about in churches here, "when they start a family, those who wanted the music cafe and the coffee bar at their church become much more interested in the nursery. I can't overemphasize the massive change that occurs in Gen Xers' taste and demeanor and schedule and priorities when they walk down the aisle and start a family." And what we want to accomplish through all this is not just to be in the same space at the same time. That alone accomplishes nothing. I want us to hear one another's stories. I want us to listen to one another's struggles. I want us to learn from one another's experiences that we have had in this life. I think Eric Johnson puts it best. Blending ages keeps the old younger and the young wiser. And that does flow both ways. This is a both-and approach. We're not abandoning age-specific or like demographic settings in the congregation. We're just wanting a fuller balance between those and intergenerational settings. And that's what the Gen Fusion class is about. Just one opportunity among many that we're going to have. And just to clarify on that, in your adult Bible classes, if you were in adult Bible classes today, you had an opportunity to sign a list indicating that you would be willing to spend a quarter in the Gen Fusion class. Not saying goodbye to forever to your friends that you've gotten close to over the last several years in your age-specific class, but just a 3-month break where you can study, learn, interact, converse, discuss with people of varying generations. And just sign that list if you're interested. If you're not currently involved in classes and didn't have an opportunity to sign that list, send me an email, call me at the office, call me on my cell phone, and I'll make sure that you get on that list. I love the definition of fusion. It's a merging of diverse, distinct, or separate elements into a unified whole. You go back and you read Ephesians 2, you go back and you read Colossians 3, and that's exactly what God has done in the church of His Son. He's brought together extremely diverse and distinct and separate people from different races, different genders, different ages, different languages. He's brought them into one body, and we look forward to a rejuvenated intergenerational model of church life here at Broken Arrow. Of course, the main concern this morning is that you be a part of that family. We're about to sing a song that reminds us of the power that can wash away our sins. And if you, based on your faith in Jesus Christ, want to confess His name this morning and turn from sins and be united with Him in baptism, to be redeemed, to be added to the family, brought into God's kingdom, and begin walking in the steps of Jesus daily, we would love to assist you with that decision this morning. Our elders are going to be at the front as we sing this song. If you have other prayer needs that you want to share, we encourage you to do that. Let's stand and sing.